My heart pounded in my chest as I snapped awake, paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, but my eyes darted around the room frantically. I could see everything. The moonlight filtering through the thin curtains, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The silent hum of the ceiling fan above, spinning lazily. And then I saw her. A woman in a white dress stood at the foot of my bed. Her long, dark hair obscured her face, but I could feel her eyes on me, piercing through the darkness. She was unnaturally still, her body stiff as if she was suspended in time. The air around her felt colder, and a chill ran down my spine. I wanted to close my eyes, to wish her away, but I couldn't. I had heard of sleep paralysis before, read stories about shadow figures and demons sitting on chests, but nothing prepared me for this. The woman in the white dress didn't move, didn't make a sound, but her presence was suffocating. It was like she was sucking the air out of the room, leaving me gasping for breath that wouldn't come. Then, slowly, she started to move. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette controlled by an inexperienced puppeteer. She tilted her head to one side, and I could almost hear the crack of her neck. Her hands, pale and slender, began to reach out towards me, fingers clawing through the air. My heart felt like it would burst out of my chest, the fear so intense it was almost painful. I tried to scream, to move, to do anything to break free from this nightmare, but my body remained frozen. Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision. I could see her getting closer, feel the cold emanating from her. She was almost upon me, her hand inches from my face, when suddenly I heard a sound. It was a faint, rhythmic tapping, coming from somewhere outside my room. The sound broke the spell, and I could finally move. I jerked upright, gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat. The room was empty. The woman in the white dress was gone, as if she had never been there. But the tapping continued. It was coming from the window. With trembling hands, I reached out to turn on the bedside lamp, flooding the room with light. I hesitated, then forced myself to look towards the window. The curtains rustled slightly, though there was no breeze. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Summoning every ounce of courage, I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. My legs felt weak, barely able to support my weight. I took a tentative step towards the window, then another, each one feeling like I was walking through quicksand. I reached out with a shaking hand and pulled back the curtain. There was nothing there. Just the night outside, calm and silent. The tapping had stopped. I let out a shaky breath, relief flooding through me. Maybe it was all in my head, a trick of my mind, a leftover fragment of the nightmare. But as I turned to go back to bed, something caught my eye. On the window pane, faint but unmistakable, were the marks of fingers. Long, slender fingers, smeared across the glass, as if someone had been trying to claw their way in. The next night I was determined to stay awake. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing her again. I set up my laptop on my desk, a bright light illuminating the room, and kept myself busy with mindless videos and games. But exhaustion has a way of creeping up on you, and despite my best efforts, my eyelids grew heavy. Around 2 a.m. I dozed off. I woke up again to the same chilling sensation. My body was once more paralyzed, and the room seemed darker than before. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly opened my eyes, dreading what I might see. And there she was, the woman in the white dress, standing at the foot of my bed, closer this time. Her face was still obscured by her hair, but I could hear a faint, raspy breathing, almost as if she was struggling to take each breath. My laptop's screen had gone dark, the only light coming from the moon outside. Shadows danced around her, making her appear even more ghastly. This time, her hands were not reaching out to me. Instead, they were raised to her face. She was slowly parting her hair, revealing a glimpse of her features. A sense of dread filled me as her hair fell away, exposing hollow, dark eyes and pale, gaunt skin. Her mouth was a gaping black hole, and the sound of her labored breathing grew louder. I could see her eyes now, empty and soulless, fixed on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. She started to move closer, her feet barely making a sound on the floor. Each step she took was deliberate and agonizingly slow. The air around me grew colder, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in the dim light. I tried to scream, to move, but my body refused to obey. As she drew nearer, I noticed something in her hand. It was a small, old-fashioned music box, tarnished and weathered. She stopped at the side of my bed and opened it. The music that poured out was hauntingly beautiful, a melancholic melody that echoed in the silence of the room. The music seemed to wrap around me, pulling me deeper into the nightmare. Her eyes never left mine as she placed the music box on my chest. The weight of it felt real, solid, and I could feel the cold metal against my skin. The melody grew louder, more intense, and I felt myself sinking into the mattress, as if the music was drawing me into another realm. Then, she spoke. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the music. "Help me," she said. "Find me." With those words, the paralysis broke, and I bolted upright, gasping for breath. The music box clattered to the floor, the melody abruptly stopping. The woman in the white dress was gone, but her presence lingered in the cold air. I scrambled to turn on the lights, flooding the room with brightness. My heart was still racing, and my hands shook as I picked up the music box. It was real, cold, and heavy in my hands. I didn't know where it had come from, but I knew it wasn't mine. I placed it on my desk, staring at it as if it might come to life at any moment. The words, "Help me, find me," echoed in my mind. I had to find out who she was, what she wanted. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep until I did. The next day, I began my search. I scoured the internet for any mention of a woman in a white dress, a haunted music box, anything that might explain what I had experienced. The more I searched, the more obsessed I became. Stories of ghostly apparitions, old legends, and haunted objects filled my screen, but none of them seemed to match what I had seen. Days turned into weeks, and my life became consumed with finding answers. I barely ate, barely slept, my mind constantly replaying the encounters. I was no closer to understanding who she was or what she wanted. One night, as I was about to give up, I came across an old news article. The headline read, "Local woman vanishes without a trace." The accompanying photo made my blood run cold. It was her, the woman in the white dress. The article was dated 50 years ago. She had disappeared from a house on the outskirts of town, never to be seen again. The house was said to be haunted, abandoned for decades. I knew what I had to do. I had to go there, to find her, to uncover the truth. The house stood at the end of a long, winding road, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to swallow the light. The windows were boarded up, the paint peeling, and the front door hung loosely on its hinges. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, left to decay in the solitude of the forest. As I approached, a cold wind whispered through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. I hesitated at the gate, staring at the dilapidated structure. My heart raced, and doubt gnawed at the edges of my resolve. But I had to do this. I had to find out who she was and why she haunted me. Summoning all my courage, I pushed the gate open and walked up the overgrown path to the front door. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty house. Inside, the air was stale and musty, filled with the scent of mold and decay. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs hung from the corners of the ceiling like ghostly decorations. I stepped inside, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. The house was eerily silent, the only sound the distant rustle of leaves outside. I made my way through the rooms, each one more decayed and forgotten than the last. Old furniture, covered in dust sheets, stood like forgotten sentinels in the gloom. Faded photographs hung crooked on the walls, their subjects long gone. I reached the living room, where a grand piano stood in the corner, its keys yellowed with age. A large, ornate mirror hung above the fireplace, reflecting the room's decay. As I approached, something caught my eye. In the mirror's reflection, I saw a figure standing behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, but there was no one there. The room was empty, just as it had been. I turned back to the mirror, my hands trembling. The figure was gone. Was it my imagination, or had I really seen her? Taking a deep breath, I continued my search. I climbed the creaking staircase to the second floor, each step groaning under my weight. At the top, I found a long hallway lined with doors. One door at the far end stood slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beyond it. I felt an inexplicable pull towards it, as if something was calling me. I walked slowly down the hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath me. The air grew colder with each step, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in front of me. I reached the door and pushed it open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The room was bare, except for a single object in the center, a wooden trunk, old and battered, with a rusty lock. I approached it cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The air around the trunk felt colder, as if it was drawing the warmth from the room. I knelt down and examined the lock. It was ancient and rusted, but it looked like it could still be opened. I fumbled in my pocket for a hairpin and began to pick the lock. It took a few tries, but eventually I felt the lock give way with a satisfying click. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in a tattered piece of cloth, was a small, old-fashioned music box, the same one the woman had placed on my chest. My hands shook as I lifted it out, the cold metal sending a shiver up my spine. I opened the lid, and the haunting melody began to play, filling the room with its eerie tune. As the music played, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, and there she was, the woman in the white dress, standing in the doorway. Her hollow eyes stared into mine, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something in them. Pain, sadness, a desperate plea for help. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She didn't answer, but her gaze shifted to the music box in my hands. I followed her eyes and saw something I hadn't noticed before. Inside the music box, tucked beneath the delicate mechanism, was a small, folded piece of paper. I pulled it out and unfolded it, revealing a handwritten note. "Help me find peace," it read. "My name is Elizabeth. I am trapped in this house. Free me." Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked back at her. Elizabeth. I had to help her. But how? The note didn't say what I needed to do. I looked around the room, searching for any clues. Then I remembered the article, the details about her disappearance. There was one place I hadn't checked yet. The basement. I headed back downstairs, the music box still playing its haunting melody. I found the door to the basement at the back of the house. It was locked, but the key was hanging on a hook nearby. I unlocked the door and descended the stairs into the darkness below. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with the scent of mildew. I fumbled for a light switch and found one, illuminating the room with a dim, flickering bulb. The basement was filled with old, forgotten belongings, covered in dust and cobwebs. I made my way through the clutter, searching for anything that might help Elizabeth. In the far corner, I found an old trunk, similar to the one upstairs. My heart raced as I approached it, hoping it held the key to freeing her. I knelt down and opened the lid, revealing a collection of old letters and photographs. Among them was a small leather-bound journal. I opened the journal and began to read. It was Elizabeth's diary, detailing her life in the house, her hopes and dreams, and finally, her fears as she began to sense a dark presence. The last entry sent chills down my spine. "They are coming for me," she had written. "I can feel them. I don't have much time. If anyone finds this, please, help me find peace." I looked around the basement, trying to understand what had happened to her. Then I saw it. A small door, hidden behind a stack of boxes. It was locked, but the key from upstairs fit perfectly. I opened the door and found a small, cramped room. In the center was a narrow bed, and on it lay a skeleton, still dressed in a tattered white dress. I felt a wave of sorrow wash over me. This was where she had been trapped, where she had died. I knelt by the bed, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." The room grew colder, and I felt a presence beside me. I looked up and saw Elizabeth standing there, her eyes filled with gratitude. The music box's melody filled the room, and for a moment, everything felt still and peaceful. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft and ethereal. And then, she was gone. The air grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling lifted. I knew she had found peace. I stood up, still clutching the music box, and made my way back upstairs. The house felt different now, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. As I stepped outside, the first rays of dawn were breaking through the trees. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure and relief. Elizabeth was free, and so was I. The nightmare was over. The days following my visit to the abandoned house felt surreal. The haunting memories of Elizabeth began to fade, and for the first time in weeks, I was able to sleep peacefully. The music box now sat on my bedside table, a reminder of the ordeal, but also of the peace that had been restored. But peace is a fragile thing. One night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard the faint melody of the music box start to play. I bolted upright, my heart racing. The lid was open, and the haunting tune filled the room. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of Elizabeth, but the room was empty. I reached out to close the music box, but as soon as my fingers touched the lid, the music stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I felt a chill in the air and saw my breath forming small clouds. The coldness was back, and with it, a sense of dread. Suddenly the room grew darker, the shadows stretching and twisting around me. I heard a faint whisper, barely audible but enough to send a shiver down my spine. "Help me." My heart pounded in my chest as I turned towards the source of the voice. There, standing in the corner of the room, was not Elizabeth, but a different figure entirely. This one was cloaked in darkness, its form shifting and indistinct. Its eyes glowed a deep, malevolent red. Fear rooted me to the spot, my mind racing with confusion and terror. The figure moved closer, its presence suffocating. I tried to move, to scream, but I was paralyzed, just like before. The figure stopped at the foot of my bed, its red eyes burning into mine. "You freed her!" it hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "But now, you must take her place." I wanted to scream, to fight back, but my body refused to obey. The figure reached out with a shadowy hand, its fingers wrapping around my ankle with a grip like ice. Pain shot through my leg as it tightened its hold, and I felt myself being pulled towards the edge of the bed. "No!" I finally managed to scream, thrashing against the unseen force. But the figure's grip was unrelenting. I was pulled off the bed, hitting the floor with a thud. The cold seeped into my bones, and I felt a strange numbness spreading through my body. I fought against the paralysis, forcing my limbs to move. I reached out and grabbed the music box, holding it tightly in my hands. The melody started playing again, filling the room with its haunting tune. The figure recoiled, its grip loosening for just a moment. Taking advantage of the brief reprieve, I scrambled to my feet and stumbled towards the door. The figure hissed, its red eyes blazing with anger. I could feel it closing in on me, the coldness intensifying with each step. I threw the door open and ran down the hallway, the music box still clutched in my hand. The house seemed to warp around me, the walls twisting and elongating as I ran. I could hear the figure behind me, its footsteps echoing in the darkness. I reached the front door and yanked it open, bursting out into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I kept running, not daring to look back. The music box's melody was my only anchor, its haunting tune guiding me through the darkness. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing in a clearing just outside the woods. The music box fell from my hands, the melody fading into the night. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. When I finally dared to look back, the figure was gone. The house stood silently in the distance, its windows dark and empty. The coldness had dissipated, replaced by the gentle warmth of the night. I knew then that I couldn't go back. The house was no longer just a place of tragedy, but a gateway to something far more sinister. Elizabeth might have found peace, but something else had been unleashed. Something that wanted to claim me. I picked up the music box, its weight reassuring in my hands, and made my way back to my car. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but I knew I had to keep moving. The nightmare wasn't over. It had just begun.